It's time to start.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Stanley's Stinkers, a unique look at college football where we pick the losers. That's right, the losers. Each week we'll look at 20 of the biggest games, we'll break down the teams, we'll analyze the coaches, and we might even flirt with the cheerleaders. But in the end, we'll predict the losers, or in this case, the stinkers in each of the contests. Stay tuned because this week's games are coming up. Well, just like you, I sat through a wild weekend of college football where several top teams faltered but did not fail. How about the West Virginia Baylor shootout? Or how about Tennessee scaring the bark out of the dogs? Wow. Well, anyway, Stanley Stinkers is back with another bunch of losers. We were 17-3 last week, bringing our season to 82-18. If you've been following, you know we don't shy away from the big games, and sometimes we do pick the upsets. We use reverse prognostication to predict the losers in college football's big games. With that being said, here are the games on the Stinkometer this week. Miami at Notre Dame. In years past, this would have been a big game on the networks, but the Stormy Ibis has fallen from their lofty flight, while the Leprechauns are just now bouncing back from almost a decade of bad luck. What this game will showcase is a chance for Miami to prove they are on their way back, and it'll also prove Notre Dame is a real honest-to-goodness favorite to make it to the big game at the end of the year. Stanley Stinker, Miami. Texas A&M at Ole Miss. Well, the Resurgents had their hands full of crimson pachyderm last week and actually showed a lot of improvement from the early season swamping by Texas, but Ole Miss still seems to have some issues at quarterback where Coach Hugh Freeze used 3 different signal callers against Bama. A&M, meanwhile, turned up their game with a picking against Arkansas last week. The Aggies are ranked in the top 10 statistically in points scored and points allowed. In my book, that is how you win ball games. Stanley Stinker, Ole Miss. Arkansas at Auburn. Who would have thought before the season started that this game would feature 2 teams at the bottom of the SEC West standings? Both teams are suffering through disappointing seasons with just 1 win each. Salvaging the season could start with this game. Despite their record, the Piggies still have a dangerous passing game, and Auburn's running game is showing some steady improvement. The difference in this game will be that Gene Chizik's Cats have had a week off to rest and a lot of time to get ready for what Tyler Wilson throws their way. Stanley Stinker, Arkansas. Washington and Oregon. Oregon is one team that survived the scare a week ago, relying on a second-half flurry to shake off Washington State. This week, the Quackers will need a total game effort if they host the other team from the state of Washington. The Sled Dogs come into this game with 1 loss early in the season to a strong LSU team, and they have a win against Stanford to their credit. Since Oregon really hasn't been tested yet, this could be the game that the Quackers are graded on for the rest of the season. Look for Oregon to come out with their feathers flapping, though. Stanley Stinker, Washington. Mississippi State at Kentucky. Joker Phillips threw his arsenal at South Carolina last week and proved to a lot of people that Kentucky may not be that bad after all. A surprising offensive explosion and a steady defense almost shocked the visitors. While that was going on, the Bullpups of Mississippi State enjoyed a weekend off and probably took notice in time to change their scheme for the Wildcat resurrection. Kentucky has little to lose and everything to gain with an upset, but MSU has an undefeated season on the line and a rested team. Stanley Stinker, Kentucky. Georgia Tech at Clemson. The buzz is slowly dying down in Atlanta with Tech's season now officially in peril. The Yellow Jackets have only 2 wins and suffered an embarrassing loss last week to Middle Tennessee State. The running game for Tech is still dangerous, and that could play in their favor as Clemson's rushing defense ranks 85th in the nation. This game might be closer than you think. The difference will be Tech's defense against a much more powerful Clemson offense. Look for a lot of points in this one, but still close in the end. Stanley Stinker, Georgia Tech. Well, that's just a snippet what the Stinkometer has on tap this week. Stay tuned because we'll have the shootout between West Virginia and Texas, plus a game in the swamp between the Lizards and the Kitty Cats. Oh yeah, and it's that big game for the top of the SEC East. It's Georgia and South Carolina. We'll have the losers of those games and a few more coming up next. Stanley Stinkers is brought to you each and every week by some really good people. Folks I think you need to know. People like 5 Front PR. They are the ones to call when it's time to take your business or campaign from the forefront straight to the 5 front. Click the link online and send them a note. Tell them it's time to take your company to the 5 front. By AnytimeCostumes.com. Follow the link on our sponsors page for 15% off your next order for Halloween or any other time. AnytimeCostumes.com. From kids' outfits to adults, scary to funny, even sexy. AnytimeCostumes.com. And our most passionate sponsor is Passion Parties by Eve. Discreet shipping, discreet shopping. Find the spark for any relationship at Passion Parties by Eve. And ladies, if you are one of those so-called football widows, you can sign up to host a passion party of your very own and get free gifts for yourself. You can find the link on our sponsors page. And by Russell Athletic. If you look around this fall, you'll find camo outfits everywhere, even in the places you don't look. Follow the sponsors page to Camo Lingerie. I kid you not. Camo for the lady in your life. Now that's having your cake and having your cake too. And check out the other great sponsors online, plus find a newspaper near you that carries the print version of the next big thing in college football. Stanley Stinkers, using reverse prognostication to predict the losers in college football's biggest games. Nebraska at Ohio State. The Shuckers won a thriller last week against Wisconsin, even though they fumbled the ball 6 times. Ohio State, meanwhile, was almost flawless with Braxton Miller running and throwing his team to a tight win against Michigan State. For the Buckeyes, this calls for a totally different game plan as they go from one opponent with a tough defense to Nebraska and their hazardous offense. If Nebraska gets a game film that hasn't been doctored and they cut down on mistakes, the Shuckers can pull off the upset. Stanley Stinker, Ohio State. West Virginia at Texas. The Mountaineers put up 70 points last week in their win against Baylor, but the bad news is they gave up almost that many points on defense. The old saying is that defense wins ball games, and defense is something Texas knows about. The Longhorns are equally as explosive on offense, having put up 66 points on Ole Miss earlier in the year, but they shouldn't really need that many points in this one. Look for Geno Smith to be good again for West Virginia, but probably not that good because the eyes and the defense of Texas will be upon him. Stanley Stinker, West Virginia. LSU at Florida. The Bengal Tigers had a tough time with Towson last week, and that could indicate that they were looking ahead to the Swamp Lizards. Or it could indicate that LSU is not as good as everyone thought. This week, a trip to Gainesville is the latest test for the Mad Hatter. Florida had an off week to prepare for LSU, and that normally means trouble. But it's only trouble if Florida can get their offense in motion against an LSU defense that's still in the top 10 in most statistical categories. Look for the Tigers to begin their prowl with this one in a defensive struggle. Stanley Stinker, Florida. Georgia at South Carolina. The silver-slacked Canines survived a scare between the hedges last week, and had it not been for the other team's mistakes, Georgia would have probably gone down in an upset. The forlorn fowl agonized through a similar surprise on the road with Kentucky, but South Carolina was able to make it much less dramatic. This game is for the SEC East lead. Both teams are at full strength following injuries and suspensions, and it will probably come down to South Carolina stopping the Georgia ground game or Georgia stopping the whole USC offense. The deciding factor may be mistakes and how the other team takes advantage of those miscues. This one should be a classic, folks. It is really hard to call, but Stanley Stinker should be Georgia. And while we're at it, here are a few more games that made it to the Stinkometer this week. Missouri will claw the Commodores of Vandy. Kansas State will shoot down Kansas. Penn State will pull the upset against Northwestern. Rutgers continues their ride over UConn. Stanford will beat Arizona. Louisiana Monroe will shut down Middle Tennessee. TCU will hop over Iowa State. Texas Tech will stink against Oklahoma. FSU will kick NC State, and look for the upset with Washington State's Cougars skinning the Oregons at the Beaver Hole. Well, there you have it, another bunch of stinkers in college football. Stanley Stinkers is intended for entertainment only. A free podcast and blog is always available online at stanleystinkers.com. You can also find us in your favorite newspaper. Join us next week as we use reverse prognostication to predict the losers in college football's biggest games.
I buried Paul.